When thinking about your theory of change and how it's going to inform your grant writing and organization in general, Aisha and I are going to discuss to just think through how your organization defines and measures impact, thinking about those clear linkages between program activities to your long-term impact, how are you currently tracking the progress and evaluating the success of your agency, what are assumptions that, if not true, could impact your program's outcomes, and how could a visual theory of change model help clarify the assumptions in your grant proposals? And what are some things that you can do to help strengthen that theory of change to make it useful and applicable for your organization and your grant writing? So, theories of change are a big undertaking. I know it can take a lot of brain power for organizations, but I think if you put that effort in up front, it makes everything after that kind of flow logically. So maybe talk through that. How have you been part of theory of change processes with your organizations, and how does that look?
Absolutely. I haven't been part of their theory of change process, but I've definitely been the one to come in to talk about the importance of theory of change, because a lot of nonprofits that I've worked with, they really bring me in to enhance, work that they've already kind of gotten off the ground, but also find those gaps in areas to where not a lot of folks are doing it, to where they can build momentum upon that and get some higher level funding. And so I say that to say, with theory of change, in particular, the point of reflecting on these linkages between activities and long-term impact, it can be a slippery slope if you're not familiarized with theory of change. And so at this point of the module, you all are pretty familiar with it. And so hopefully you're at a point now where you can identify exactly those linkages between the current activities that you're doing and how does that translate to that long-term impact for the grant proposal. And with the framework in general, it's again trying to track and monitor that in terms of a timeline, so that one, you're addressing the needs of the community, but at the same time not being repetitive or redundant to where you're kind of running in place like a hamster wheel. Theory of change helps to flip that on its head and make sure that you're actually making traction.
Yeah, absolutely. I would agree. You don't want to rely on one type of source over and over again. You really want to kind of contrast that, whether it's qualitative or quantitative, but storytelling, maybe having different stakeholders involved in forming your theory of change. I've been involved in multiple parts of the process where I've been at agencies where we undertook that process. I've maybe stepped into some theory and change workshops or planning sessions with organizations I've been on the board for, just have known through my network just to provide that insight. And you really want to make sure that you're capturing like all these different inputs and different perspectives to really test what your organizational model is. Because we all get in our rabbit holes. We all think our organizations are the one organization bringing change to our community, but it's good to challenge that, have people, whether it's in the same community, same region, even just people who do the same program across the country but a little bit differently, come in to kind of temper and strengthen your theory of change. One example I can think of, an organization I was doing some work with, there was a supermarket that had opened in their community. This was a community with a high degree of food insecurity, high degree of need, thinking about how there wasn't a lot of fresh produce entering that community in general. And that all sounded great. They all got a little high on their own supply, thinking about how amazing they were going to be to like bring this full-service supermarket to the community. But when they were planning, they didn't realize that there was a higher than average undocumented population in this community, which means that a number of SNAP and WIC benefits that they were counting on, just based on like the overall poverty demographics in the community, they weren't out there. So when thinking about assumptions that are not true that could impact your theory of change, it's really kind of like looking at some of the underlying statistics and challenging what you're seeing in the community to what the data is telling you, and adjusting accordingly based off of that.
It's a really great point. And I think that also, again, just the preventative nature, but also making sure you have that contingency built in specifically for a grant proposal, right? In the event that there are these other external factors that may impact whether or not the need gets met for the community, or those funding dollars have to go somewhere else. Strategically being cognizant of that when you're writing your grant proposal, funders really take heed to that, and they really appreciate that, because funders also recognize that things can change when you're dealing with opportunity challenge or culturally sensitive types of communities and activities. And so if you're being forward facing with that in your grant proposal in terms of, if this happens, this is what we're going to do, that also allows you to stand out from your other competitors that's going for that same grant, because you also have to be mindful of that when you're grant writing as well. So further reflect on some of these aspects and questions that are featured on our slides right now for you to consider where are you currently in your nonprofit as it relates to having clear linkages from program activities all the way down to that long-term impact, and how do you even define your long-term impact, right? It's super important to keep that in mind, as well as really taking the opportunity to figure out that one step that you can take to strengthen your theory of change framework. Or if you don't have a theory of change framework, this is definitely the module for you to begin to implement that not only within your process, but also amongst your staff at your nonprofit.